Interested in exploring alternative investments? Curious about real estate ownership without the hassle of landlordship? Join us for insights from Brent Ritchie, founder and president of Enriched Investment Group, Inc., boasting over 18 years of experience in real estate, infrastructure, engineering, construction, and project management. Let him guide you on redirecting your funds and gaining control of your financial future, empowering you to take control of your wealth. Well, that's awesome, man. I love it. You That's actually, I don't know if you'd realize this is actually how I started off in life, so to speak. Kind of tripped up into it. I ended up starting a real estate investment trust. I had a bunch of guys that want to invest in real estate. I asked a lawyer, what do I do? They said, hey, put your money here. Here's the structure. It ended up being a REIT, which I didn't even realize, but it was a small one, but it was fun. So interesting. So I love what you do. Yours is probably much larger than mine ever was, but that's pretty cool. So tell me a little bit about like what you do and how you got started, if you don't mind.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, no, and just right before that, a lot of people kind of trip into being a landlord, right? They try to
Oh
sell a
yeah.
house, can't sell it, and they're like, I guess I got to rent it. And a lot of people that kind of experienced that in the last cycle. So myself, I grew up on a farm in rural Ontario, Canada, and just constantly, yeah, I guess was seeing a bigger and a better life, and something a little bit different. And so that took me on a journey. Eventually ended up doing structural engineering. Did a lot of infrastructure projects, kind of projects all over the world, and then some North America bound, which is really great. This little book, it's on my shelf over there, but the little purple book that devastates a lot of workforce minds and gets us thinking of some different options. The Rich Dad Poor Dad book.
Oh
That
yeah.
kind of
There you go.
tripped me, I would say, into a different paradigm shift and looking at things differently, right? And instead of just, hey, you're stuck in this trading time for money, which is not a bad path for some people too. For me, it was almost just, hey, what is, I never liked this. Want to, save up enough money so by the time I'm 65, hopefully I have enough to have, to die before I, to spend before I die. So I never liked that paradigm. So that kind of had me more the entrepreneurial focus, looking at a couple different businesses, opportunities, and long story short, kind of led me to the multifamily space. And so a lot of the engineering kind of background, the analytical side, my life, for 10 years was spent around all these nerdy, socially awkward engineers, being one of them. And so, I just thought that's how everybody thinks. But really, kind of seeing that, it's a niche space, and I think a certain skill set that suits well into doing what I'm doing. And so that's really what got me going into, hey, I'm working a job, but I want really trying to create something different for my life. And so that was, starting to look into getting and buying multifamily real estate apartment complexes.
So you started off right into the family investments. Is that what you did? Did you do that just yourself, or did you create a partnership to do that, or how did you? Because I mean, some of these complexes are pretty expensive. So I don't know what you ended. Did you buy like a small, 4 unit, and then go to 12 and 20 and 100? And I mean, like, well, how did you get into the multifamily start? I'm assuming what you did, and you correct me, is that you said, oh, well, one house. That's not a good ROI because you got to buy this house for whatever $200,000-$300,000. You're going to get $2,000 a month, and I got to fix it up. And oh, wait a minute, look at all the expenses. But when you start multiplying that out over a much larger complex, you get that efficiency of scale, right? One roof, maybe there's four units under it instead of one unit, right? So you got 4 times the income coming out of the same roof space you might have in a house, that kind of thing. So was that the engineering side of it that said, hey, look, the numbers here look a little better if I go to multi-unit right away? Is that what you did? The analytical side you kind of took over? Or why did you just jump into it? Usually
Yeah,
houses and then you
great.
multi-unit.
No, great question. Yeah, I did a little, back in the end of high school, early university, I did work for a couple landlords, doing some renovations and, some landscaping and contracts, snow removal. This is up in Canada. And then, doing some leasing and showing, so I did that kind of for maybe 2-3 years during that end of high school, early university period. But really, went off a different course and did engineering for quite a while. And so, there was a couple paradigms that were shattered for me, and maybe I can shatter for a bunch of your listeners too. So it's kind of like how you accidentally shipped into investing in real estate through a REIT, right? Through a group of people putting it together and buying some real estate. Similar paradigm for myself. And so it was looking at, hey, it's actually easier to own, I would say now in today's world, 70, 80 unit plus rather than a 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 unit. And so you're like, what? How does that work? Because now you got somebody on site, a property manager and a maintenance guy that's taking care of all those elements. You know, a lot of people, they want to own real estate, but nobody wants to be the call, hey, my toilet's broken, you know?
Right,
or
at 3
like,
a.m. It always happens at 3 a.m., right?
yeah, yeah,
That's
exactly. Hey,
early.
I'm on vacation, and you don't
Yeah,
want to deal with these issues. And so, you
right.
know, that's where if you actually scale bigger and you do bigger projects, you know, that allows you to utilize economies of scale. And like you said, hey, instead of buying, you know, 40 properties, and if you're looking at like, you know, what number do I need in order to replace my income, you know, it's a different equation, right? And so, yeah, you got a great economies of scale. So for us, our first project was actually 120 unit property in Glendale, Arizona, which is kind of like Phoenix MSA. And yeah, it was kind of starting there, but a group of people together created a great opportunity for people to kind of invest in and the vehicle for that. And so kind of collectively pool the group together, you know, people that want to, hey, I don't want to be the landlord, but I want to own some real estate, and you know, just helping them make fantastic returns.
If my
So
math is right, that would have been around 2005 you started doing this stuff, right? Is that roughly when, because you said
well,
18 years. What was is that roughly when you started? Oh five, oh six, oh seven, that range? Or was it a later?
no, so yeah, that was kind of like I got into that, you know, some of the student residential, student housing early on. So that was, you know, back early 2000s.
Oh, in
But then
2000,
went
so
into
earlier. Okay.
the engineering field for, you know, many years, and that was really the project management side, the construction management, you know, designing. Actually, I did bridges, you know, designing and building bridges kind of all across North America and some projects globally. So that was the job side. And then the side hustle, kind of building something on the side until it became big enough to replace doing what I was doing, was really back in 2017, kind of starting into that multifamily space. So our first
Okay.
property we got under contract was end of 2018, closed early 2019. And so that was the start of the
So you hit things at an
that
interesting time,
multifamily
which
world.
yeah. So you missed the 08, 09. I was just curious about that, but you did hit. If you started 18, 19 and you had multifamily units, and I don't know how Arizona handled it, but I know some parts of the country, when we hit roughly March of 2020, didn't things change a little bit for landlords at that time, potentially, where people
Yeah, that
didn't
was
have to pay their rents? Well, that was like an optional thing
that was
then,
a
all of a
scary.
sudden. How
Yes,
did that
yes.
affect you
Oh,
guys?
especially for your Jersey, especially
Yeah.
for your listeners in Jersey, right? I
Yeah.
know several, you know, of my investors too that live in Jersey and have some properties there, and that is that is a challenge. And that is why, you know, I was in the Toronto area, but we just bought in the Sunbelt states, and we just bought
Okay.
in landlord and business friendly areas for that specific reason of mine. And so it really, we focus on landlord friendly, business friendly areas, because that's a significant risk factor. Like you said, you know, sometimes you're going to have some massive hurdles and challenges with your local government there to be able to, you know, operate a facility and
So they were a
operate an
little more
apartment complex.
friendly towards a landlord. Because what I found interesting in the hindsight, and you can explain this to listeners better than I can, but a lot of people still had the ability to pay their rent, and they just decided not to. Which I understand if you're struggling. Yes, okay, there's a problem. You lost your job, your business closed. Yes, okay, we need to help you guys out. But the ones are like, hey, look, I'm fine. I can keep paying my rent. And they just said, well, I don't really feel like paying it this month. I'm going to hold it and invest it or whatever. That was a little, like, to me, a little sketchy, right? But people could do that in certain parts of the
Yes.
country. But I guess the Sun Belt, you say, handle that a little differently. I guess Arizona. Well, you're in Florida now, right? So was that
Yeah.
primarily
Yeah.
the southern states you pretty much were
Yeah,
in for the most
Texas,
part?
Arizona, Florida, even, Georgia in certain areas actually wasn't so friendly on that side too.
Okay.
But I think you saw a lot of people with some new cars,
Oh, right. Yeah,
new
you wondered,
TVs.
right?
I think electronic payments went up through the roof, but they're not paying rent, and you're like, well, you just got a brand new TV. So yeah, in certain areas, you realize, hey, there's different challenges in each market, and for your owner, that's a certain appetite that I like to avoid. There's this fundamental thing called, if you sign a contract to agree to pay rent, you should pay rent, and if you stop paying
Right.
rent, yeah, there's some great programs in that time for people, kind of helping them on their feet,
Right.
but if that's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and you're still in the same situation, that's where a job market's out there. That's
Yeah.
yeah,
Agreed. Well, we're going to take a quick
challenging.
break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finance. I'm here with Brent Ritchie, and we're talking about multifamily investing, and pretty cool. You start off in Ontario, you ended up in Florida, so you like kind of went from one end of the continent down to the other, which is kind of interesting to me. Hopefully, you get to visit Ontario occasionally. But we were talking a little bit about like, the epidemic, the COVID, how things shut down, and how, how government can affect business for sure. Right. And it affects people obviously too. We had an issue and we dealt with it differently in different parts of the country. So I know here where I'm in the Northeast, where we're pretty heavy handed as far as like what the government came and said landlords could and could not do. And I just remember a lot of landlord people I knew, they were like, hey, well, that's great that the tenant doesn't have to pay their rent, but the mortgage company is still asking for their mortgage every month. And that took them a long time before they started giving some, assistance to the landlord, saying, hey, look, I can't not have income and still have the debt. That's not the way the business model
Yeah,
works. And they finally,
yeah,
started saying, well, okay. And they made the mortgage, the lender started saying, okay, we'll read. And they were probably doing it anyway proactively, because they would just come to them and say, and that's the key, right? When these things happen, talk to the other party, right? If you're a landlord and all of a sudden, for some reason, you have issues with the rent coming in and you're like, I got to pay the mortgage, talk to the bank right away. Don't hide from them for 6 months, because they're just going to foreclose on you. They really don't want to have the property back, contrary to popular belief. They want you to keep owning it and keep you managing, because they don't want to be a landlord. So we talked a little bit about how the southern states are a little bit different. So I'm sure you still had issues. You want to talk a little bit about how you kind of dealt with whatever might have come up? Because some people did lose their jobs. It didn't matter what part of the country you're in, right? So what ended up happening for you guys?
yeah, yeah. And I heard from somebody else. It's like, first, I think it's Bob Iger, with who was the CEO of Disney for many years, right? And he's like, first, be human, and just look at it on a everybody's individual basis, right? And kind of see what their situation is, and try to work with them, So I think that was, for us, it was drilling down on an individual level and making sure our property managers, if somebody was in challenge, right, to reach out, and like you said, don't hide. so so let's work together. Let's create a plan. Let's see how we can, funnel you towards some other resources that are available for helping, right? There's a lot of great organizations that stepped in and also helped chip in too, right? And so I think that was it, on that side of things. With anything, there's some bad apples in the mix, and some people that try to take advantage of the situation. But, by and large, I don't think that's the intent of people, right? And so is, trying to work with the residents and tenants, in your specific communities that you're serving and working in. And so, I think that was, is specific, and localized to those areas. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Well, you're kind of a special class, which from the investment side we talk about is called alternative investments, which tend to be a little less liquid, right? So, I mean, if you buy a piece of real estate, you can't like buy it at 10 a.m. and then sell it at 2 p.m. without a little bit of cost there, as far as you could, I guess, but
yeah.
very expensive to do it that way. Unlike a stock or a bond or some of these other things that tend to be fairly liquid, it's considered relatively illiquid. I mean, you can cash it out, but there's a process. In fact, some real estate investment trusts and things like that are sold pretty easily, and some are not. And you have to go to kind of the secondary market where you have this guy in between that says, I'm going to find you a buyer and a seller, and you're going to have to take a haircut of some kind, probably, because it's just not very liquid. So typically when people get an alternative method, you get into it for the durations. Like if you're going to buy into a piece of real estate, 120 unit building, The idea is you're going to be one of those investors while the building is there, and you're looking at the cat, just like if you bought the thing on your own without any other investors, right? If it was just your building. You don't buy with the idea
Yeah.
that in 6 months I'm going to cash out and go do something else. That's just not the way real estate tends to work. So, do you want to explain a little bit like how how you talk to the community and how you bring in the investors and why they would come into this asset class? Because frankly, it's done pretty well recently. Because especially in the South, right, the real estate values have gone up, rents have gone up, people are moving out of some of the states up north. It tends to be, especially during COVID, a lot of people moved down there where the restrictions weren't quite as great. They could open a business a little bit easier. So there was a lot of jump, basically. And some of that's continued from what I'm seeing. I mean, you kind of tell me what's going on and,
Oh yeah.
what's happening
Oh
down
man. Big time, big time. You still see those migration trends. And I was just
there.
at a
Right.
conference last weekend or the weekend before in Dallas, and you're seeing those massive turns out people like to have freedom and don't like to be heavy-handed and oppressed, and want the ability to own and operate and kind of conduct their lives in the way that they see fit, right, without the government's overreach. And so you still see those strong trends, right? You look at your top five metros. You're looking at your Dallas and your Houston and your Tampa and Orlando and Raleigh and those strong metros across the nation. Phoenix had huge in migration, and I think maybe there's a little bit of a shift right now, but I still think the future forecast of Phoenix is strong. But yeah, you're seeing that trend continue quite strong. And yeah, like you said, on the real estate side, the way that we specific do it and own it, a REIT is a different structure, right? So the REIT is the overall fund that's going to buy a bunch of different assets, people coming and going, and so there's some flexibility and liquidity in that. The way that we specific structure it is, we'll scout, and we'll kind of we're network across the Sun Belt states, and we're networked with a bunch of brokers and partners and various sources that are constantly bringing us deals. And so we're chewing through many opportunities to really find where we see great gold mines, where we see huge value add that we can come in and bring value to that community. Maybe it's an area where if your home has wear and tear, right, from your family, just imagine a home with 120 families, right? Or a property, a complex, a community, so apartments kind of go in dog years and everything's, accelerated. So it just constantly needs capital infusion and love, and styles change, and your wood paneling is no longer in favor, and the grays are maybe shifting a little bit more. And so it's a continual process to put money back into these communities, right? And the government also doesn't want to be a landlord. They want people to invest in these communities. They don't want to fix them up, right? They want to create the opportunities for groups of people like us to come in, pool together and buy and invest and create better lives and communities for our residents, right, across the nation. So I don't know. I know we kind of went two different ways, but does that?
Yeah, you had a couple. It sounds like
it.
Well, it sounds like you had a couple things. It said you got like the deal flow. People referring you now. Are these projects that are maybe are you building new ones? Or are you coming and renovating older projects and revitalizing the areas? It sounded like you're doing like a government-private partnership where I know the government doesn't have the skill set to go in and like redevelop 120 unit complex as an example. They're like, oh, all right, we got an issue here. Let's go find a partner that can do this and who has some experience coming in and doing this, because we do want people to move back to the city or back to this area. And the way to do that is to make the area nice, right? If it's a nice area, people will be there. They can bring their families. The kids are going to go outside and play, that kind of thing, right? So they're very concerned about the quality of an area. And when you have especially a large complex, it's going, deteriorating. And that typically happens because the owners are not reinvesting. And that's part of the issue that you see with these large projects is that they cash flow really well. But part of that cash flow is really reinvestment cash flow. And if you just spend it on, yourself, at some point, you're going to have a problem because now you're going to start losing tenant. Your rent increases are going to decrease. And, you get this like domino effect where it's just going to go, it's going to roll downhill. And then it gets into stress. Maybe there's an estate sale and the person passes away that owned all this property, things like that, where they just sat around and just ran the thing into the ground and just lived off of it, right? I'm sure you've seen that. And so these are the kind of projects you kind of get involved in. You come back and say, look, we need to really upgrade this whole thing, which involves obviously quite a bit of money, not just the asset itself, but you have to put a lot of money into it. So tell us how that goes. And like you said, deal flow. So what makes you decide what's a good one? What's maybe not such a good one, and where do you go? And when do you say, well, that maybe is not something we can do for whatever reason.
No, great question. So, if you're looking at the macro outlook, right, your bigger perspective, we look at the markets where there's jobs being created. People are moving to. You got that overall net migration, that those people moving to an area are taking up what's available, and then there's less available. And so, it's a good supply demand demographic, right? And so those are really your top two fundamentals of apartment complex, right? Of real estate in general. If a bunch of people are leaving the area, it's hard to sustain the value versus if a bunch of people are moving to an area, your values just continue to rise. And lived in, Toronto for a bunch of years, and that market is just still on fire. It's crazy. You got like 500,000 people moving there a year. And so first we look at that fundamentals, supply demand, where's everybody moving to? Like Wayne Gretzky talks about, you go to where the puck is heading, not where it is. And,
Right.
and so, all right, everybody here for the Northeast, all of my
Yep.
hockey fans out there. So, that's a key thing, right? You're just looking at where those supply imbalances exist, and where are things, about to explode, or where do you see just a strong fundamentals? And from there, then we're looking into the specific submarkets. Where are strong submarkets? Of don't buy in the hood, right? If your property looks too good, price is too good to be true, it probably is. And so,
Right.
Really finding those areas in the city that are growing, that are gentrifying, that are, improving. And then within those, you're going to have, maybe you got 6 apartment complexes or 10 apartment complexes, and some need, like you were saying, need that love, need that care, need that money poured back into it, need to take care of, the roof, and the exterior needs painting and asphalt, and just interiors need renovating. So you see where those opportunities are, and we do more of a fundamental approach, and this is probably the engineering side. So sorry if I'm getting too detailed here for all your listeners. But we are not as much pioneers in this space. We look at something that's more proven. Hey, if we got a bunch of apartment complexes, we see some that would be comparable properties if we do these renovations.
Right.
And now we can, go in there, fix it up, improve that community. And as a result, get rewarded in better rent, right? People will pay different for a 2023 renovated property rather than a 1970s vintage, looks like nothing's been touching it for years and years and years. So that's where we really look at those properties, see a proven case of, somebody that's already getting those rents, is already crushing it in the submarket. We like to look at properties that are a submarket that's relatively occupied, and so you don't have, little a bunch of vacant units. We looked at properties in Cleveland, Ohio, and God bless the people in Cleveland, Ohio. But it's like a 25% vacancy rate, right? Is not so good. So yeah, those are more kind of like, we look at proven models in that specific submarket. That's a great submarket, and then find, where we can truly come in, bring value for residents.
Sounds great. We're going to take another quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. All right, welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finance. I'm here with Brent and Ritchie, and we're talking a little bit about the fundamentals of buying the real estate. So it sounds to me you kind of do it almost sounds like the Warren Buffett model of investing in real estate. You kind of buy the value in the neighborhood, right? You want to buy the one that's a little, when you're buying houses, I mean, I know whenever you'd buy a house, you say it's good to buy the house that's a little distressed in the nice neighborhood, right? You get that discounted price. Everybody else's house is nice, but that one's a little bit run down. But once you fix it up, you're going to get a good return on your investment when you do that. So you're just doing that on a much larger scale. And I noticed another thing you said. I know that we've had that issue with some of the cities here in Trenton where you're constantly trying to go in and redevelopment, but it's really hard to be that first anchor, investor, because you need several to kind of change the dynamic of the neighborhood. So that's extremely risky for an investor. So until you get a little bit of stability, and that's key. I mean, that's where sometimes people understand that are on the outside investment. Until you get a little bit of stability, it's hard to attract the rents and attract the people in if they don't feel the neighborhood is good. Now, you can do a great building, but if the neighborhood's not shifting, it's really struggle. And that's been a struggle that goes on a lot of cities these days. So anyway, just something to recognize that it's not that people don't want to invest. It's just a tough thing to do. and you have to figure out a way to make it work. And I mean, we've tried to open a hotel several times, like in Trenton, and it just never, they just always have a hard time with it because they don't have the people around it yet. Now it's getting better, but it keeps taking these waves, and it keeps taking a few, a few tries. And every time they get a little closer, a little closer, a little closer, and hopefully they succeed. Because I'm always rooting for Trenton, believe me, because it's a great city. But I know it's a struggle from an investor standpoint. So you guys are kind of buying the one that's a little, so you mentioned like buying the house from the 70s and you upgrade it to like 2023, right? So you throw in things like AC and stuff like that, right? It's like
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Anyway,
like old school car back in the day comes with AC.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a time people forget, you bought an old apartment building. There was no AC. You just flipped the windows open and you got that breeze coming across. That was it, man. The breeze was off. There was no AC. But nowadays people pretty much expect it. I mean, that's kind of I'm sure that happens rarely these days. I'm sure most of them have some kind of AC, but that's what you're doing. You're really modernizing and updating it because I would say, back in years ago, maybe the closets were smaller. Now they're bigger, right? Bathrooms are different, right? We focus more on a bathroom than maybe we did, 30, 40 years ago. It's so there's a little changes in tastes and styles and what we like, right? Is that the kind of stuff you guys do and the engineering you? So let me tell you.
Yeah. I know the
Yeah.
recovering engineer.
Yeah, the recovering engineer. Like, so what kinds of things, if you're buying that older building, what are some common changes you end up making saying, hey, we want to really be like, instead of being the one that's on the low end of the scale, we want to be the one that's a little on the higher end of the scale, because those little improvements can really return well on the rent, right? If you do those little extras that people are looking for.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Big time, right? Like if a lot of our listeners were going to rent something today and you saw your 1970s product, you'd be like, I don't know, right? Especially my wife. And versus, hey, this thing looks beautiful, it's nice, I'm gonna be willing to pay a premium for that, right? I'd gladly spend another $200 or $300 for, now I got granite countertops, I got stainless steel, I got new flooring and lighting and light fixtures and all of those features. And then it's almost like if your property looks a certain way, especially if it's a bit more rundown, maybe landscaping hasn't been taken care of, maybe the paint's old, or it just looks tired, that's going to attract a different demographic than maybe the one that you want to serve. And so first thing we love to do whenever we take over a new project is those immediate curb appeal items, right? What are the immediate, how can we make this place, when you drive up, you're like, wow, this is nice, versus, oh my gosh, lock the doors.
Right.
So
yeah, that's great. I mean, you put something important. You start with the curb because that's what people see. And you go, oh, look what we've done on the outside. What do you see what we're going to do on the inside, right?
Yes.
Then they immediately like, oh, that's a totally different place, right? And it's interesting you start from the outside because people could see that, and you're really starting kind of the buzz that you're starting to work on this place, right? And especially if you're doing like, many, like 100 or more units, it's hard to do them all at once. You're probably doing them in phases, right? You're doing parts of it, I would assume, if you have a big comp, unless the whole thing is empty for some reason, right? I mean, how do you typically go about this?
Yeah, so typically we're going to buy existing properties that are already, 90% occupied. And so generally as those tenants move out, that's really our opportunity to come in and renovate those older units that aren't to the level that we'd like to have them, right? That we want to do a really good job and make a beautiful place for our residents in that, specific to that submarket. And so, yeah, generally it's on turns, and when people move out and, or maybe it's somebody that's, wants to renew, but hey, I see the neighbor's got nice, updated cabinets and counters, can I do that? And I'll pay an extra, $100 or $200 or whatever that would be for those improvements, right? And so, yeah, that's generally, your natural attrition in apartment communities is about 40 to 50% turnover a year, and so you typically have a good amount of inventory that you can take and renovate. So yeah, that's almost like the exterior, and then you try to, what are amenities, right? What are amenities where our residents would love, that makes this place a fantastic home for them, that they want to stay, right? And they want to invite their friends to. And so that's where we look at, the exterior, the interior of the unit, the clubhouse, and then what other amenities we can make and add for our residents. It's ultimately, trying to improve their lives. So.
Because I know around here we do see a lot of advertising for like luxury apartments, and I know when I visited down in Florida, there's a lot of large, really nice apartment complexes going up, which is interesting. It almost feels like, it may be just my imagination, it feels like there's more rentals going up than houses sometimes. Is there some kind of shift happening that, do you see a reason behind that? It just feels like a lot of rental units are being built, maybe compared to what I'm noticing, at least on the residential like ownership side. So what are you kind of seeing? Or is that just my imagination? The fact they're up front, maybe the other ones are like in the back somewhere.
No, no. I mean, you definitely see, especially in the last, 12, 18 months, especially, Florida, we can talk Florida specifically. You saw a ton of people moving to this area, right? Which is kind of what fuels that need for developers to come and develop more units and bring them online. I don't have the stats on me right now. We are, with the rising cost of everything, we are seeing that start to slow down. Your debt costs, of course, are through the roof. But it's creating, quite an affordability crisis. And so, of course, that rent to own gap, you kind of monitor that. If you're buying a house today, and we're in this situation, if you're buying a house today, your costs are dramatically higher, right, than what it was, 2-3 years ago. So that gap between, how much it costs me to rent versus how much it costs me to own really also fuels the need for the rental market too. So you see both, but I think Buffett recently, what we were seeing in that Tony Robbins event, Buffett invested $800 million into the three major home builder housing sectors. Just seeing that major supply, shortage in the market. So still opportunity, and still a need.
So what are you seeing? I mean, they always talk about, Florida, I know I grew up down there. So we used to see these boom and bust things like, hey, there's a great opportunity. And then like everybody from around the world seems to come in and build. And all of a sudden, hey, we overbuilt. I mean, hotels are famous for doing that. I know residential's famous. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, now we have way too much capacity. And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, that trend drops off just enough where it's like, now we got too many units and we're not absorbing the way we thought we were going to absorb them. So do you ever worry about that? And how do you counter that? Because these southern states are famous for that. Because if you want to build something, you go down to the town and you say, I'm zoned for this, I'm going to put up so many units. Like, yep, you're right. Stamp. 2-3 months later, you're building the units, right? Whereas up in the north, it's like a much different bureaucratic process. Well, how are you going to affect the next town? And it's just a lot more conversation goes on about impact about the whole area. Even if you are zoned for it, it doesn't really matter. They still have these conversations. It takes months and months, if not years, to get something approved. Down there, it's a lot quicker, right? Which means it's cheaper, right? But on the other hand, you get it up. So you worry about that, or do you project that, like who else is building with you, like to see, like, or add new capacity, and like, are we getting a little too ahead of ourselves? Should we like maybe tap the brakes a little bit, or when do you start? What do you see happening? I guess as we're moving ahead right now.
Yeah, no, great thing. And that is so specific to that area, right? Miami, you saw that, way overbuilt and tons of high rises and everything else that they were putting there, and really creating that you get too many people building at the same time. Now they got to run specials, and now your project's not doing as well.
Right.
You need a certain rent, you need a certain occupancy in order to have a successful project, and that lease-up period is critical. You're constantly looking at that supply-demand imbalance and making sure that you are not in a sea of other development, but you're seeing kind of space and opportunity for you to serve an under a needed demographic that is in a shortage. So it's something that you keep an eye on. What other projects are going up, what other ones are being proposed, what's in the pipeline, for planning, and hopefully be the first one there to pull the trigger and go when you see the need.
Well, that's awesome. We're going to take another quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finance here with Brent Ritchie, and we're talking about multifamily investing, which is, it's pretty cool investing, frankly. So it's an interesting area of the market that not a lot of people get a lot of exposure to. And really, you're coming in, which I think is one of the lower risk ways of doing it. You're finding projects that are a little bit in distress, so to speak. Maybe they haven't been kept up over time. You go in and you update them, and then you can raise the rent, and really you're adding value to the neighborhood. You're adding value to the tenants. I mean, you're kind of a win-win all the way around. And you get a better product, you get a little bit of a return. So kind of give us an idea of how you were talking about deal flow. People come into you and like give you some projects. So when you see one that looks of interest to you, give us some ideas about what do you do next to make sure, hey, this is going to work? You usually have to put a decent amount of capital into this over a period of time, right? Explain to, like, you have a rent, it's X, and you're going to put so much money and you're going to get Y, and obviously you might have some debt involved, I'm assuming, at some point, and things like that. So how do you do the analysis of the projects to figure out if this one's likely to work or not?
No, great question. And we'll keep everybody excited on this second segment because we'll get into the numbers a little bit, but not too detailed. So, it's kind of like we can look at a basic, let's say we got a 100-unit apartment complex. It's needing some renovation. It needs some improvement. It needs some curb appeal. It needs to get rid of the wood paneling, as an example. And so say
Still
we're
out
able
there,
to
huh?
go in and
Yeah.
say we're able to go, especially those northeast states.
Yeah.
Say we're able to go in and we're gonna be apparently wood paneling's coming back.
Oh, is it really
We're
interesting? Okay.
we're yeah. So if we look at that asset, everything is traded on what they call a capitalization rate, a cap rate. It's
Mhm.
effectively like if you just paid cash for a property, how much cash on cash would this property generate? And so maybe in today's market, depending on where you are, it might be give or take a 5%, something like that. So if you bought this apartment complex today, all cash, it would generate about 5% return. The beauty with real estate is you're putting debt, and maybe that's about 2/3 or 3/4 or half, depending on the performance of the asset and the debt. And then you're going to put the rest in investment, right? Equity. And so that is what they call the capital stack. And so you have what it takes to buy that asset. So you got the debt, and then you got, your equity. So your equity is actually leveraged, so now it's a 2/3 ratio, or it's, 2-to-1, or it's, 3 times, 4 times, depending on the debt.
Right.
So you actually are able to take advantage of the leverage, but you have a question.
Oh, no, no. Leverage is
Oh no.
interesting. I was a comment that, yeah, I'm going to explain leverage. I just clarify. So leverage is cool because it's good and bad, right? So let's take the simple example, 50% leverage, right? You put 50% down, you have 50% cash. So now you're 50% leverage because you're really using another lender's money. And that's great because now if you grow the asset, you're going to get all of that, right? But you're going to be paying down the debt at the same time out of the cash flow. So literally the mortgage money is going down. As long as you're cash flowing, your equity is going up. So you're getting, instead of getting whatever 10% return on the equity, you might get 20 because you borrowed half of it right there, right? Because if it goes up, 10%, you got 20%, which is good. But the downside of it is if you have another Miami where the property drops 60% in value, all of a sudden, you're underwater, 10, 20% based on the current valuation. So equity can cut, leverage can cut both ways. And that's why I think you mentioned briefly, like, depending on the asset class, you were talking about leveraging at half or 2/3 or 3/4. And I'm going to assume that's based on the kind of the risk profile of what you're buying and the likelihood that it is to go down 10, 20, 30%. Because right now it's harder to imagine now that property actually does go down because we've been seeing all these great increases recently. Real estate is a cyclical business. It doesn't go straight up all the time, just like any other asset class. And that's why we tend to diversify in my world of wealth management. You don't want to be an all in one asset class because if it crashes, you want to have something else to counter. But no matter how much you love it, if your asset crashes, tech crash, real estate crashes, bonds crash, they all crash at some point. But you don't want that to affect your lifestyle or your long-term investment goals. So you always want to make sure you're managing this risk by doing what you said is, doing the Wayne Gretzky thing, looking ahead and where the puck's going to be and try to figure all that out and adjust. So I just wanted to, kind of explain why that's important, because it does have an advantage. It increases your return on investment because you're literally putting like a half or 25% of the cost of the building down yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you just don't still have to put money into it, right? So why don't we talk about that? So now you set it up so it's going to obviously cash flow up front, right? In a relatively conservative way. And just in case you have a higher vacancy rate than you expect, you still want the building to sustain itself. In the meantime, you want to have money to put into it. So how do you kind of determine that aspect of it as well? And what do you expect the new rent to be? How do you analyze that and figure out what the new rent's likely to be?
Yeah, no, really good questions. I love it, and diversification is critical too, for sure. And I think so. I guess a couple things. One is selecting the right debt to making sure that you're able to ride through, the market and the times that you're in. And so that is definitely a key factor and key element. And the second part, just if you're looking at the asset, say you find the area, you find a demographic, you find a sub-market that you're going to serve, and you see the opportunity where, hey, I could take this property, I can renovate these units, and I can get what the neighbors are getting. And so let's use a 100-unit property. Say I'm able to increase the rents by 100 units, or by $100 if I renovate the unit, right? And then $100 is pretty modest. And so 100 units, $100 a month, so that's 10,000 a month, and then times a year, 120,000, right? So you're like, okay, I increase the cash flow on this property by 120,000. But with capitalization rates, kind of how they're evaluated, how they're sold, if things are trading at a 5 cap, that's a $2.4 million increase in value you just created for that property of a $100 increase. Or and maybe the capex, so maybe the capitalization expenditure that you put, how much it costs you to renovate and fix up those units, maybe that costs you, 5,000 a unit, and 5,000 a unit times 100, 500,000, right? So you just increased your value by 2.4 million, and it cost you 500,000, right? So good equation there. You said another key thing too that I want to also hammer with you or reiterate is making sure that the deal can stand on its own 2 legs, because you don't know what's going to happen, occupancy, everything else. And so making sure it's not a deal that you have to constantly feed, cash flow to, but it's something that you've kind of conservatively looked at and underwritten.
Right. Yeah. And you point out some pretty important things, and I'll just restate what you said. But yeah, so whenever you increase, I mean, basically I look at it as, think about it as almost like a bond yield, right? So if you get the 5% bond yield, so how else are you going to get the $120,000? If you had to actually put cash down to get that 120K, right, at 5% yield, that's how you got your number, the 2.4. That actually increases the value of the piece of the asset itself, the real estate, because you just created another $120,000 in income, right? Which is that's one of the beauties of real estate. It does that. If you can get the rents up, even modest rent increases have a dramatic effect on a large complex, because you go back and say, well, if I were to buy something like a bond and try to create that same cash flow, what would that mean as far as an asset value? And that's literally how you increase the value of the piece of real estate itself, right? Which is something, and it works both ways too. If the rents go down, it can hurt the asset value too, because it affects the capitalization rate, which is what we're talking about, the yield, basically the return on the investment number, right?
Yes. And it's almost like certain businesses are going to be sold at equity multiples, right? Maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever that number is. And real estate, just the if you can buy and structure it right and kind of ride through economic times, a 5 cap is about a 20 multiple, right? So any increase in your income or reduction in your expenses is going to have at a 20 multiple, which is fantastic. So yeah, that was definitely a key spot. And then, I mean, just overall the multifamily asset, industrial and multifamily, those have kind of been the 2 darlings. Real estate investments, office, of course, is hurting, retail a little bit more too. But
you just touched on office really briefly. We only have a couple minutes left, but I wonder if you want to touch on that a little, because I know some offices are being repurposed, and I've even seen some are being repurposed to residential. What are you seeing in South Florida? I'm just curious in the markets you work, because there are some higher vacancy rates, and people are wondering, well, what's going to happen as these notes become renewed and the mortgage rates have gone up, so they're going to renew at a higher rate and still have a pretty high vacancy rate to compare to what they had historically. Many of these complexes do. So it's an interesting thing I'm sure they talk about in your world, like what's going to happen in the 23, 24, 25 range as these things actually come to play. What do you think? Do you think there's opportunity, I guess, on the residential side there? Do you think you're going to see some repurposing of any of these properties as far as what's going on?
Yeah, you are seeing some even cities kind of give incentives for developers or multifamily operators to come in and repurpose some office space. I'd be curious to see that one massive one in San Francisco, that tower that sold a 30% discount or 20% discount. So I think you'll see a lot of those repurposing taking place. You are seeing that in old malls that are kind of getting run down, and how do we reimagine this space into a better yield for that community and for investors. Yeah, so in the multifamily sector, I would say we're definitely seeing. I mean, the demand is still strong, especially in certain areas, certain markets. You're seeing that kind of prove out true. In other areas, are being impacted by Florida insurance, right? It's a massive issue of Houston's insurance as well. But Dallas is still trading hot. So it's really, I think it does get into those specific submarkets and those kind of communities that we're looking at.
Well, Brent, this has been awesome. Any final words? I mean, real estate's really hot now. It's doing well. So I commend you for everything you're doing to help provide good housing for people. Any other
Well,
thoughts
thank
before we
you.
cut off?
No, I mean, that's what we, constantly do. And we look at how do we, create value and how do we improve, kind of our investors' lives and the lives of the people, our residents that we serve in our communities. So it's honor and constantly learning, never stopping. And so thank you very much for having me on the show.
All right. Thanks again, Brent. You're listening to Master Your Finances. Go to masteryourfinances.us and subscribe and listen to the show and subscribe to the transcript. Have a great day.